Hello, my wonderful students. It is I, your humble, self-proclaimed Professor Kamal, and today we'll be discussing the interesting world of Romans, specifically their relations with torture, punishment, and executions, with a bit of law here and there to explain some of the context. But I will have to tell you guys that you should have a sheet in front of you. If you do not have a sheet in front of you, then please tell me. And then also, um, the points in this video are organized within the sheet. So please make sure that if you're lost, just look at that sheet and you will find where you are. Now, if any of you want access to this video, it's on YouTube. Just search it up. Here's the title. I will put it up in the screen. Bada bing, bada boom. Just search that up and you'll have this video. So without further ado, let's just start. Oh, and by the way, some of these, probably most of these moments are going to be in an audio format. So please enjoy.
Well, first we need to define torture. We could say multitude of answers. However, the United Nations have put a definition specifically saying, quoting, any act by which severe pain or suffering inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining information from him or a third person information or a confession, end quote. With this term in mind, we can use this to analyze the Romans, what methods were used, and the context between the tortee and the tortured. First, let's dive into punishments that the Romans inflicted on people. Whipping. That's kind of self-explanatory, but this punishment is using a whip, that is a rope, and striking the convicted usually on the back. Depending on the crime determines the amount of whips a person receives. Also, a fact I learned in my research is that the Romans took the whip from the Greeks and improved on it, with the flagrum and the cat o' nine. And just to solidify this, here's a video of a man in a church just striking a box using a flagrum.
About which one you think might be worse, the 3 or the 9. So I'm going to demonstrate this for you. And remember that this is cardboard. Cardboard is much thicker than skin. The one with the 3. Now what actually happens with this one can actually be worse because it's lighter. The speed that when it hits is actually faster and it can inflict more damage.
Damn, that person can whip a box. God damn. Okay. Next we have burning with hot pitches, which is burning a person's skin with bars of iron. So here are some photos I found on the internet. So take them with a grain of salt since we weren't alive in the Roman times. Then we have the fidical
figura,
Okay, I just call it the rack torture. It could also be called the liar torture, as the convicted would be tied down and stretched with a series of pulleys. And to demonstrate it, welcome our resident torchee! Stevius. And so, right here, you basically see a depiction of the rack torture, where he's basically getting pulled with a series of pulleys. Okay, let's go to our final punishments, which is the most recognizable punishment, the wooden horse. This could be tied to pile driving in the ancient time. However, for simplicity's sake, and not to be totally demonetized here, here's a brief drawing using Stevius again. So, his hands are tied and weights are put on his feet, and the idea is they're basically using gravity to split him apart. Similarly to pile driving, but instead, instead of using a long stake, that goes through someone's body, it's just gravity. At least it's somewhat better-ish. Okay, thank you, Stevius. Let's go back to reality. Okay, let's focus on what we're actually here for, the executions! Woo! Okay, first on the list, we have the bronze bull. This was not from the Romans. It actually originated from the Greeks. But knowing our old pal, the Romans, they basically took everything. So now looking at this drawing and diagram, we basically can get a glimpse of how it would work. Basically, a person would get into the bull and then be roasted alive, having their skin be burned off and die from pain or smoke inhalation. Also, because you know me, here's a horrible twisted fact. But did you know the bull would basically muffle the screams of the person inside? Also, in some documentation, there is evidence for the creator of the bull, Perilos, being put inside the bull by the tyrant of the time, Pherolas, and be killed, essentially. Now, for the next two tortures, let's move into my good old pal Photoshop. Okay, next on the list, we have the boat torture, a sick and twisted method to kill someone, as it was used by the Persians, documented by Plutarch of Corduania, and stolen by the Romans. This method involved trapping a person in between two boats, forcing them honey and milk, and this would attract insects such as bees. Also, while the person would have diarrhea, and to finally top it all off, the person would have honey spread into their nether regions essentially, such as the armpit, groin, and other inconvenient places, in which they would be finally casted into the water, where insects would basically feed on them and reproduce in a person's body. So, this would essentially kill someone, and they would either die from the sun, dehydration, hunger, or septic shock. To fit with the theme of water within these executions, let me introduce you the Poenoculali, or I personally call it the bag execution. There is mixed information about this execution, but the gist of it is basically putting a person in a bag with animals. This could range from a snake, dog, rooster, monkey, basically any animal you could think of, essentially, that could fit in a bag. And to top it all off, if the person wasn't dead from the animals trying to get out of the sack, they would be basically thrown into the sea, and they would sink to the bottom of the sea and essentially drown. Okay, moving out of Photoshop, we are going to talk about the second last execution, crucifixion. Well, crucifixion is associated with the death of Jesus Christ and him becoming part of the Holy Trinity. However, there are a few variations for this exact execution. But in layman's terms, it's basically a person being punished and whipped. Then they are tied to a cross where their limbs are basically nailed onto the cross that is already pre-embedded into the ground. Normally, people would die from blood loss, dehydration, and starvation. Also, this exact execution could last hours, days, so the extent of this punishment and or execution could vary. And also, a fun, uplifting fact was that Emperor Constantine in the 4th century actually banned this execution in honor of Jesus Christ. So yeah, something good. Finally, we have the most arguably daring execution held in the prime of the Colosseum, the Damnitis Adabistius, which is legit sending a person to fight a beast while spectators onlook. Also, the animals could range from a bashful deer to a prideful lion. These beasts would be purposely provoked by professional trainers and would be sent after the convicted. Also, the execution was used for people that were charged with treason, and ties to this with our second half of this lesson, which is the legal and moral reason for this. However, to move on, we need to ask the very important question: was torture actually useful for information gathering? And the great important answer for that wonderful question is hell no, no way, it was not. This was because people would say anything to basically stay alive. This is also still true, even in our own legal system, as there are forced confessions under inhumane circumstances.
Okay, guys. You know what? Let's just have a little bit of a stop here so we have a little breather. So, while you guys are going to read that little passage to transition into the next session, I'm going to have a tea break. Okay, well, I finished my tea. And you know what that means? On to the next session of the Roman torture lesson and execution, all that kind of stuff. Well, um, I'll just let little old Audio Kamal take over, so I'll see you later. Bye, guys.
Okay, so to explain the legal system of the Roman civilization, we gotta dismantle the psychology of the people. As the Greek philosopher Aristotle once said in his rhetoric, mentioning public torture, stating, torture is a kind of evidence which appears trustworthy, because of a sort of a compulsion is attached to it, nor it is difficult to see what may be concerning it, and what arguments, if it is in our favor, we can exaggerate its importance by asserting that it is the only kind of evidence. But if it's against us, and in favor of our opponent, we destroy its value by telling the truth about it. All kinds of torture generally, for those under the compulsion, are as likely to give false evidence as true, some being ready to endure everything, rather than telling the truth, while others are equally ready to make false charges against others, in hope of being sooner released from the torture. End quote. This furthers my statement that ended the first section of the video, but it also brings into question the effect it had on the people itself through the legal system, which was quite similar to our modern take of the legal system, as it had the courts and political debate through words called a conversation. In a conversation, in modern terms, is a lawyer and a prosecutor, with a judge that dictated all the rules and punishments a person would receive. And finally, the carnifex, which was the torturer slash executioner. Okay, so each side would present their argument, and the judge would give their verdict, in which the carnifex, great at their duties, would swiftly deliver the punishment. These trials would not have a jury. There would be no jury at all, so all the power was in the hands of the judge. Also, we have to consider who actually got tortured. as they bring a new perspective. Since we have mostly slaves, women, and Christians charged with the most crime back in the day. They were charged with these crimes because the legal system was built on a basis society towards men, towards citizens in the society. Since, in order to be a Roman male citizen, to be charged with a crime, they would essentially have to go to trial, or they would have the resources to get out of punishments. And this basically brings up my favorite word and term, which is, when talking about governmental politics, is internal corruption. I love it. This also caused most crimes and punishments via torture a bit doubtful to the context of these events. Additionally, when you break these groups down individually, it becomes apparent how grim the situation actually was. Women were considered as property and lacked the legal defense to argue for themselves, so they were tortured censoredly, with whipping in some cases. Slaves were property of slave owners. Honestly, they would get punished, but it would be pointless in the long run, since owners would be mad that their slaves would get their bones would be broken, or they would be in rough condition, since most slaves were used for manual labor. So if they got hurt, the owner of the slave would lose profit in the long run. Finally, Christians. During this time, Christians were hunted down and killed. This was due to the religious differences apart from Sparta. Most people that were found to be Christian were tortured and killed under the pretense of treason against the state. So, most cases, people were in these situations, again, were probably falsely convicted and not properly charged. Overall, this is Roman torture and the psychological effects it has on a person. And I feel like there is a moral lesson to this weird fever dream of a lesson, which is, I'm not a psychopath, and I don't get paid enough for this. However, another great lesson that we've all learned collectively through these wonderful minutes is torture is bad, it is not good, and the Romans were weird, sick people. Anyway, see you next time when we talk about Egyptian torture. It is me, signing off. Bye!
Okay, just letting you know, this is the end of the Roman torture seminar. So, thank you for watching, and overall, thank you for listening to the video. Now, I will tell you this, because this is going to be posted on my YouTube channel, it's going to be not having live clips of me. So just letting you know, it's just going to be pure information. Well, anyway, see ya!